If you remember, the beginning of Jesus' ministry occurs when he enters the synagogue in Nazareth, his hometown, and he is invited to do the reading for that day. He unrolls the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, and it is said there, which is the great Jubilee proclamation, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, healing to the sick, sight to the blind, release to the captives, freedom for those who are in prison, that it is the time of God's grace and favor, the time of Jubilee." He rolls back the scroll and gives it back to them, and everybody's saying, okay, so now what? And Jesus says, this is the time when these words are going to be fulfilled. In other words, this is the proclamation of the reign of God, that those who are in prison will be set free, those who are blind will see, the deaf will hear, the lame will walk. Everyone will have the grace and favor of God that will make them whole, lift them up, and indeed set them free. People are disturbed because the thought that Jesus is sharing with them is that this is not something, the reign of God is no longer just for the elite or an exclusive few, but is meant for everyone. And they're upset because they had expected that God would only care for them, love them, heal them, and that everybody else was going to be left out. In that particular instance, Jesus says, I know, look at the story of Naaman. And here's what the connection is. Look at the story of Naaman in the time of Elisha. Where did God's healing happen? You know how the particular story of this encounter in Nazareth ends is that Jesus is driven out of town because they just find it too much for them to take. So what about this story today of Naaman? First of all, he's from Syria. Aram is the ancient destination of Syria. And if you follow any news today, you know that there's still trouble between Israel and Syria. That anyone to the north in Damascus was always the mortal enemy of Israel and Judah in the south. In fact, it was one of the few places that Israel, under the time of Solomon, could not be conquered, because they always seemed to be much stronger than Israel. And so this story, the location of the story, and running through my brain is this phrase that realtors use, right? Location, location, location. Location is everything. That's something about the location, not only of Naaman, but also notice where Elisha is in Samaria. Something about these locations are important to consider in this first story from the book of Kings, and two, as we will come into the gospel. I love the part where it says, aren't the rivers of Damascus as good as the river Jordan? Now, let me tell you, here's a little clue in. Maybe in the ancient times, the river Jordan was something to marvel at. But today, it is no wider than this table. And to be honest with you, it would not be a place. It might give you the disease rather than cure you of your disease. So it's hard when you see it today to imagine what it might have been. But the source of healing comes from the waters of the Jordan, which, by the way, come from the snows of Mount Hermon all the way up in Lebanon and gush out of the side of the mountain in northern Galilee, and then run down through the border, because the Jordan River actually formed the border from the land of Israel to, all those people over there, all the foreigners and outsiders. And that's also a part of the story today, isn't it? A foreigner comes to Elisha, the man of God, seeking healing, because it's been recommended to him. Actually, I needed a referral from my doctor, and when I finally, after 2 attempts at getting a referral, that it's not until November that I even get a consultation, let alone an appointment with the So a referral in ancient times must have even taken longer for God's sake, because they didn't have iPhones, and they didn't have computers, and they didn't have quick and easy access to the information that they needed. To make a long story short, finally, the servant girl to Naaman says, you know, don't you just love that phrase? If he would have asked you to do something difficult, wouldn't you have done that? And he's asking you to do something simple. Just do it and see what happens. And sure enough, Naaman is cured, and he makes the bold proclamation. Now I know. And you have to wonder if it's the what do you call them, the media wanks of the Book of Kings, who shift the narrative that this is no longer about the cure of Naaman. This is about glorifying the God of Israel. Don't you just love how that shift in the story happened? Now I know that there is no God in the world except in Israel. Well, that just warms the heart of all the people in Israel. Because now they can go, so you people up there in Syria, you don't have anything. We've got it. Oh, anyway, that's a whole other part of the story later on. Location is everything. And notice as the gospel is, and I should say, I just got a couple of notes, and it says one of the things that this is true for all of the scripture. Because in telling any one of these stories, whether it's the one from Kings or the one from Luke today, is that we're invited in a deeper way into the reign of God. And so that's a part of what you have to keep in mind. Remember again how Jesus' ministry begins with the announcement that the reign of God is at hand. So any of the stories that we've been listening to are meant or intended to be invitations not only to stand and listen to something that went on in Jesus' life, but to step into the world that he is imagining for us. That if we imagine what the reign of God looks like or might look like, then it might move us to change our hearts, change our perception, change our connections, our focus point, our orientation, whatever it might be. So we're invited into a deeper way. You'll see, hopefully, what we're invited to consider. Jesus is walking along, and notice where we are. Again, location. On the border between Samaria and Galilee. I just thought, what would it have been like to walk through the streets of Nogales along the border? What might that have felt like at the time? That might be what it's like. No, there are no walls, there's no barbed wire between the two. Now there's barbed wire between the heights of Galilee that are claimed by Syria and now occupied by Israel. I've been at that border where there are indeed guards, and about 2 miles down the road is the other border checkpoint that would have led into Syria. I've been there, and it's very uncomfortable, to say the least. So here we are at the border between Samaria and Galilee, with all of the ancient baggage that went between the people of Israel, or Judah, and the people of Samaria. Remember again the Samaritans, as Patton told the story. The Samaritans were people who were considered by the people of Israel, the Jews, not to be true Jews. They worshiped God on Mount Gerizim, which is in Samaria. They worshiped God in a way that meant that only the written Torah was legitimate, because they were people that did not go into exile when the Babylonians and the Syrians conquered Jerusalem. They did not go into exile. They stayed in the land. And so they didn't get all of the rest of the story that the people who went into exile got. And that rest of the story was the oral tradition. So the Samaritans only had part of the story, not all of the story. And therefore were always to be held with great suspicion, with great disdain. Those people people, they're not even full Jews. They're not even full Israelites. They're half breeds. And you can just kind of go on, given all the language that you want to give about them. And yet, twice in the story of the Samaritan that Pat told, and this story, something interesting is occurring, isn't it? The suggestion, first of all, in the writer of these notes that I have, that maybe leprosy isn't the best translation here. Because leprosy, in my mind anyway, connects into Hansen's disease. That it might be, the Greek word in the text actually means skin disease. So if anybody got freckles, that could be a skin disease. Anybody who's got sun splotches, that's a skin disease. See, it doesn't have to be leprosy. Any discoloration of the skin was a skin disease. And because the people in the ancient times didn't understand where these things came from, it just was better to, like we were doing a couple of years ago, it's just better to keep wearing a mask. Because any encounter with them, close encounter with them, might contaminate you and you might get it. And so to keep one's distance meant a lot in terms of the person that had these skin diseases, right? These were people, these 10 men, who had families, but who now, because of their skin disease, were excluded from the community. Excluded from the economic benefits of the community, excluded from the social benefits of the community. They were excluded in a way that we could only begin to imagine, because none of us have really ever experienced that. Excluded, well, as Pat's story told, that, oh, that person is unclean. And so you walk to the other side of the street and pass by. Maybe some of our folks here this morning know the feeling as homeless people of being kind of, right, walking along the other side of the street and not wanting to have any contact. We see people do that, of moving away because you just, something about them might contaminate you, whatever that might be. So here are these 10 men. Notice all that Jesus says is go and show yourself to the priest. They're the source of healing in the community. So this is already a threat to the establishment, because Jesus is saying, go and show them, meaning by the time they get there, as the story unfolds, they're already healed. So what do you think the priests are going to feel about that? Who did this? How did you get healed? You didn't come to us. We didn't give you all the prescriptions to make yourself pure. Go wash in the bath, go wash, do this, change your clothes, get new clothes, do this, do this, do this. We didn't give it even a chance. You're healed. Why are you coming to us? One comes back. And I love the scene in the story, because here's this poor man, a foreigner, Samaritan, and Jesus talks over him. Right? Notice he doesn't engage this man directly yet. He says, where are the others? He's talking to some audience out there. Where are the others? Why is this one man come back? Where are the others? And then finally, Jesus addresses him. A couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, Jesus engages the very people who everybody else in that community would have nothing to do with. He engages those with skin diseases who are unclean. Well, this particular story doesn't say he touched them in any way. It's obvious that there's a close physical presence between the 10 and Jesus. That Jesus is bold enough to say, it's like St. Francis after he took off his city clothes and rich clothes. He goes out and associates with the lepers. And at one point, when people come and say, what are you doing? He actually goes and embraces the leper and kisses him on the mouth. To the people standing around, it's just shocking. To those who are engaged with Jesus in this way, it becomes becomes a comfort for them, doesn't it? It becomes a release for them. Remember the promise in the synagogue? Release to those who have been bound and oppressed and enslaved. Turning the story around, it might be that our own comfort level, disturbed by this story, where we want things to be smooth and easy and even, that as the story concludes, that Pat was telling, when Jesus says, whose neighbor to the one in the gutter? The man is forced to say, the Samaritan. And then Jesus says, well, then you need to be like the Samaritan. Our comfort level with how things are, that's why thinking about walking along the border today, it's very easy to keep the wall that says, what I don't see, I don't have to engage. What I don't see, I don't have to make any changes in my own life because of what's on the other side of that wall. And so it again confronts not only our individual prejudices and biases, but it also might confront our social, our economic, our community, our society's prejudices and biases. What we don't see, we don't have to respond to. What we don't see, we don't have to engage with on a personal level. Jesus says, go, your faith has been healed. And I wonder how many of us, again, like the question a couple of weeks ago, where the disciples asked, increase our faith. How many of us have the faith enough as a result of entering into the reign of God to fully embrace Samaritans, foreigners, lepers, homeless, enemies? How many of us are willing to embrace the reign of God in such a way that it changes